Thanks for watching this episode of Turning to Him. I invite you to just take a few seconds right now at the beginning and subscribe to this channel so that you can get more videos like this in your feed. Thanks again. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Turning to Him. I am here with Kenneth McNay, who has been gracious enough to join me here. We've tried to do this a couple times, and our calendars just never connected. So I appreciate you sticking with it. How you doing, Kenneth?
Yeah, I'm doing good today.
Good. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am born and raised in the church. So my mother's side of the family has many generations. They've got somebody that was baptized by Joseph Smith Sr. So
Really?
in the lineage, someone that came into the church that early. On my father's side, my father is a convert to the church, and we learned later in life that his parents were converts to the church before him, and they had gone inactive for a time, and then he got in contact with the church in high school and joined the church. So when he came to his parents and kind of explained this, they're like, "Well, actually, we've heard of this before."
Wow.
So he was not raised in the church, but my parents have raised all of us in the church. I'm number 4 of 6, so we have a bit of a larger family, and for that time period, that was pretty normal.
Sure.
And I'm a father of 3.
Okay.
So we've got half the size.
Yeah. Well, I've heard that 4 is the new 6.
Okay. So we have a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. Looking around even at wards that we've been a part of, it's the numbers are changing. The demographics are changing as time has gone by.
How so? What do you see?
Well, I saw in the military wards. So I spent time in the military. I did about 6 years as an enlisted member of the U.S. Army. So we were near Fort Bragg. So we lived near Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And I would say from members that we saw there, 4 or 5 kids was about the cap. So we're done now. 4 to 5 kids, we're about done. And I think part of that may be that the military gives a lot of stability for a family. They can find a lot of support. It's kind of an interesting experience. Some people can find the military is very destabilizing for families, and some people can find that it brings a lot of stability and structure for families. And I think both of those are true. It just depends on the experience that you have. So I tended to see members that were looking at 4 or 5 family members, and that was about the top. That's a good time to stop. And then, as we've moved away from military wards, 2 to 3 kids, sometimes 4. It's kind of what we see more of.
Really, bigger families in the military wards?
Yeah, that kind of tended to be the thing we would see.
Now, where are you living now?
So I'm near Raleigh. I work for Cisco Systems, so we've moved up to near their RTP campus. That's Research Triangle Park. So we're very close to Raleigh. We're in the Apex Stake. So for those that know the Raleigh area, the temple is located in the Apex Stake. So pretty close to the Raleigh Temple.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Okay, so you mentioned that you spent time in the military. Is that where you met your wife? Is that where you started your family?
So somewhat. I also served as a missionary. So my wife and I meeting has to do with serving as a missionary.
Okay.
I left as a missionary from kind of the Seattle area. Outside Seattle, that's where my family was living. And I was serving in Campinas, Brazil. And by happenstance, I was there when the Campinas Temple was under construction and when it had an open house and dedication. So I got to participate in all of those, at least to some degree, while I was serving. There was a sister missionary that served in Campinas, Brazil, and I took quite a crush on her. and she's from the Seattle area. And so she returned home earlier than me because a shorter mission service period. And I returned home, and we kind of chatted and talked and got in contact. And so really the first time I met my current wife, it was a New Year's Eve kind of end of year multi-stake young single adult event. And she had invited me. She knew my older brother was going to be coming along, so she invited one of her friends to sort of make a double date of it.
Yes.
So we met. We kind of did our double date, and my brother wasn't really enamored with the blind date, but she and I kept in contact and attended some other young single adult events in the area. And so we kept in contact for a little bit, and pretty quickly I contacted this mission friend and was like, I don't want to be rude, but I think I'm going to date your friend. And this friend contacted her, was like, hey, I don't want to steal your boy, but I think I'm going to, go date him. And she later kind of related this story that she's like, this friend has moved out of the state of Washington State. She wanted to try and find a way to bring her back in that circle again. And she thought, if I can teach Kenneth to be a really good boyfriend, maybe she'll come back to the state and they'll date. Maybe that could work out for him. And that's not quite the direction that it went. We dated for a time, and then we split off, and I joined the military. And it was during that period in the military I came back. I was visiting family for sort of the end of year holiday season for Christmas and New Year's. And she was coming back after having completed her entire schooling. She completed a bachelor's degree and was going home, and she already had a new job lined up in Las Vegas, and was just visiting at home, and kind of sent out an email to everybody that she could think of. If you're home, it'd be nice to get together. It'd be nice to do something, just something social, something if we can make something match up. And I guess I was the only one that responded. So we went on a couple of dates, and she's like, I'm going to come out and see you in North Carolina, because that's where I was. And already sent me to North Carolina at that point. And so she moved out here, and we got married pretty quickly. And that's kind of how we met. We met because of this friend that I got a crush on in the mission field.
That's great. Yet another reason to serve a mission.
Yeah, it's true. It helps you meet people.
That's right. That's neat. Okay, so you all get married, you move, you're in the Fort Bragg area.
Mm-hmm.
And, to walk us through what happens next.
Well, during the time that I finished my military service, we stayed there in Fort Bragg. I was assigned to Fort Bragg for all of my 6 years in the service. So we saw families come and go, and we did see families that left Fort Bragg and came back to Fort Bragg. We just never moved away. And after that, I also attended college at a community college there near Fort Bragg at Fayetteville Tech. So we stayed additional years there while I attended a community college program. And then once I graduated there, then we ended up moving up into the Raleigh area for the job with Cisco.
Okay.
So we had about 5 years there together, kind of the tail end of my military service and those 3 years of attending college. So we had 5 years there. We hadn't had any children at that point, although it wasn't through some special effort to not have children. It was just, it had not happened.
Yeah.
So when we move up into this new area, we've suddenly got new healthcare through work. The military will give you pretty good healthcare, but there are some constraints that were a little frustrating. And so my wife knew that we probably would need fertility care, like actual medical care for fertility. And the military wasn't super helpful at that. And going to a civilian doctor after, that kind of helped progress things, but it didn't quite work out. So we did a couple of different types of treatments while we were there in Fayetteville area. And then we moved up here. Suddenly I had coverage. I had really fantastic coverage, and we could start to pursue additional treatment plans.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was also kind of an experience for me. We had dogs as pets, and there was definitely a point as I was getting a little older that I realized these dogs will not grow up.
Yeah.
They have grown as much as they will grow.
Yes.
And so if I wanted a more mature fathering experience, it couldn't be with the dogs. I needed to have kids. And that really helped me shift some of my attitude about fertility care that had been a little stick in the mud.
Okay.
And some of my attitude about our relationship. So we married civilly, and we moved up into the Raleigh area. I finally kind of thought, we need to get sealed. I think we need to make some preparations and make some changes. And that largely needed to happen from my side, not from my wife.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with my eldest quorum president and the bishop at the time, and it was pretty clear, I've got to make some changes. I think I need to, properly prepare to return to the temple. Of course, I've served as a missionary, so I've obviously been to the temple. I've attended the temple. I know what the experience is like, but I had a lapse of a number of years. So we made some progress there. And so there was things happening spiritually and things happening kind of emotionally with this idea of like, if I really want a different fathering experience, it needs to be with kids, not with dogs or other pets. And we suddenly had economically, a path forward. I was very generously paid, and I always have been here. And it's been an amazing blessing, the generosity of getting well paid. And that was a big change for us. The military pays pretty well. Some people can really enjoy it, but we found it very challenging. Mm-hmm. And especially spending time outside the military, just going to college. My wife worked in the school district, and so we suddenly found ourselves with a much more generous path forward.
Yes.
We received IVF care. So IVF, that's in vitro fertilization. Mm-hmm. And it's becoming much more common that people have to look towards IVF care as one of their pathways to fertility. So we're always pretty comfortable talking about it. We know that not everybody understands all the depth of it and what goes into it. We got comfortable with learning the clinical terms, learning the medicine that goes beyond just, the two people love each other and get together, and this is what happens. So
right.
And so my wife and I found there were other couples that needed to learn more. So we've always been pretty open about just talking about our experiences, and talking about not just our experiences with IVF, but other treatments as well that we've used. So IVF is an interesting little system. So they'll start with, and no one should take me as a medical professional, so this is going to be summarized really shortly. So they're going to start with some hormone treatments to help eggs mature. It's kind of the first step. And then they're going to harvest eggs very carefully and combine a sample of semen so that those can fertilize and begin to grow. And for our doctor, he's got a very specific pattern. He's worked on his procedure for a long time and has a very good success rate with his procedure. And so they were going to give a certain number of days that these new little blastocysts begin to develop, and then they're frozen in pairs. So you have two in each little tiny vial. They're frozen, and then each time that you're going to go do an attempt to try and get an implant, then it's two little blastocysts that have to try and root into the uterus.
Okay.
And after that egg harvest, he also wants a little period of time for no hormones, no treatments. Let the woman's body kind of self-regulate back to a more normal state.
Yes. Clear
out some of those hormones that have been used to mature the eggs. So we had a little waiting period. So we had the egg harvest and then the little freezing. So at this point, we know we've got 10 little embryos that are progressing, and that means 5 little vials that are frozen. So that means 5 attempts. And that's what we know is happening.
How long have you been married at this point? Is this 6 years, or have you progressed past
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, that's about 6 years married. It's about
Okay.
6-ish. I guess maybe we're on about pretty close to a 7-year mark.
Okay.
Pretty close. And so, yeah, this is really good. The timeline is a good reminder. So at 7 years, we got sealed in the Raleigh Temple. So we've been married civilly for 7 years and then got sealed in the Raleigh Temple. So we had started this IVF process just, kind of just before this this sealing process, this time. And then we started doing some attempts. So the first attempt, nothing worked out, and we're like, okay, we'll just we give it about a month and we try again. There's a little bit of hormone treatments in preparation for an implantation, and that's to help get the uterus, the womb lining ready, but it's very simple. Mm-hmm. It's not the kind of aggressive hormones as before.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of hormones, and the second attempt takes. So we've got 2 babies on the way. Now, I say we have 2 babies on the way, but what we found out the very first week that we go back to our fertility doctor, we've got a number of weeks we're going to visit with the fertility doctor and have imaging. And then at a certain point, he's going to pass us off to our actual, perinatal team.
Okay.
So they're going to make sure we're moving along, and then they're going to do a handover. So the first week we go back and we do imaging, and they're like, okay, we've got one little blastocyst, or I think maybe it's a zygote at that point, one little zygote and one little heartbeat. Great. Okay. We're like, okay, great. We've got one. That's fantastic. That's all right. We're on our way. We're on the pathway now. We're on. And so we return to him in a few weeks, doing imaging again, checking that everything's growing at the right rate. Blood work is all good, things like that. And so he's doing the imaging, and he says, okay, well, last time you visited, we had, a little zygote with one heartbeat. And he says, well, guess what? Here's the twin. It was hiding off in the corner. I didn't see it, but there you go. We got 2. And it's far enough away that he can say, okay, like I said, we unfreeze 2 of them in the little vial. Both of them have taken. This is not the egg split. This is 2 unique, little embryos that grew and successfully implanted and are growing. So now all of a sudden we're very surprised that, okay, we've got 2 on the way. And we're making this progress in the pregnancy. We get to about week 11, and that's this handover time. He says, okay, now you need to, hand over to your medical team. And that's already been arranged. Now my wife has some risks because of IVF and fertility, and then just some other factors of risk. So they're watching us very carefully. And as we're progressing, they're like, one of these is really undersized, really small. We really would expect it to be larger. In fact, both of them are kind of growth restricted. And when we see twins, that's not abnormal to have them a little bit growth restricted, but baby A looks a lot smaller than we'd even expect. Okay. So we're just a little concerned. We're going to have you come in much more often. So I think we're at the point of like every 2 or 3 weeks, we're going in, a little bit of checkup, some blood work, some imaging, just to make sure things are moving along. And as far as they can tell, everything's healthy, everything's moving along properly, but the babies just look smaller than they would anticipate.
Okay.
So we get to week 18 of the pregnancy. And week 18 for us, and I think for many pregnancies, but for us, that was anatomy week. So this is the week that we're going to go for imaging. We've got a long appointment planned, and they're going to go through the anatomy for both babies, make sure everything's good.
Yep.
So they go through baby A. Baby A is, for all of the imaging, has been very active, have been moving around a lot, that they're just like, it's just small. It's just a small baby.
Sure.
It's okay. It's a physically active baby in the womb, but we're just concerned. But they go through baby A's anatomy from top to bottom, and it's a little girl, and everything's fine. There's like, everything's fine. It's just small. That's all. And then at that point, we'd been through quite a long appointment, so we're kind of tired. We don't really take notice that the imaging tech goes through baby B, and it's just a lot quieter. She's not showing off all the different measurements. She's not pointing out all the different anatomy, and we're not thinking much about it. And then she's like, okay, I'm going to go talk to our perinatal specialist, and he's going to come in. And the doctor's, we've already met the doctor, we already know him, but so she goes, she tells the doctor everything she's got in the imaging, and then he comes in. And I'm really grateful that, like, the way he expressed himself was remarkably skilled, I think. As he comes in, he says, baby A is totally healthy. There's nothing wrong. With baby B, there is a constellation of abnormalities that we see in her development. And it's known as serenomelia, or Mermaid Syndrome. Now, he kind of leaves us to just look that up later on our own. He doesn't go on to a long description of Mermaid Syndrome. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But then he just kind of says, sometimes this is not very serious, but you do not have a best case scenario. And her body will not be compatible with life. So there we are at week 18, being very clearly spoken to by a medical professional. You've got a healthy baby, and you got a baby that won't live outside the womb. And so, he lets us talk a little bit, and he gives us some advice about what we should do. And ultimately he says, my professional opinion, you have a certain level of risk in this pregnancy, being a twin pregnancy. And he says, I don't recommend that you attempt a selective abortion, because then you introduce risk. He says, so my recommendation professionally is you move forward, let both babies continue to develop as long as they possibly will, and try to deliver both babies. And that's what he recommended. And we're like, well, that's totally fine. That's absolutely fine with us. I don't think we would have chosen a selective abortion if it had been less risky. We just would have moved forward. So Mermaid Syndrome is a condition in which the umbilical cord is not providing a sufficient blood supply for the baby to develop both upper and lower body. And so the body has favored upper body development and disfavored lower body development. What this means is anything from about the belly button downward is not fully developing. So that includes bladder and kidneys and part of the intestine and bones of the lower body, like pelvis and sacrum and legs and so on. And this is important because those organs are going to be put into function during the womb. So the kidneys and the bladder start functioning while the baby's in the womb, and they start processing amniotic fluid. So that's not going to happen. So there's going to be developmental issues there. And as he said, it's true. There are some cases of Mermaid Syndrome that they're able to perform surgeries they're able to alleviate some of the symptoms, and we were not a best case scenario. So we kind of knew from week 18 we're going to have an infant loss and a surviving twin. So we had this kind of a roller coaster period of the second half of the pregnancy to sort of approach this idea. So immediately we contacted our family, we contacted our bishop and elders quorum president. I brought it up with my boss at work, but that's partly because my boss is a member of the church. At the time, it's a different boss now than I used to have, but he was a member of the church, so I felt like I could talk to him openly about this scenario. And we just invited people to join us in fasting. Invited our family, invited the ward, and of course, ward leaders spoke with stake leaders. So we became a known family on the stakes radar. And we really talked about what we wanted in fasting. My wife and I had grown up in the church, and we'd heard plenty of maybe the urban legends of, oh, this is what they saw on the scans, and we did a fast and everything changed.
Sure.
And we both kind of felt like that might be inappropriate. We didn't feel like that was the right thing to pray for in our request. So for us, we were pretty pointed in our invitation. What we are asking for is the miracle of both babies move forward in the pregnancy as long as they possibly can to give baby A the best possible development that baby A can get. Because we knew baby B wasn't going to be compatible with life. So we knew that up front. And we didn't get anybody that tried to tell us any different, which was fantastic. We didn't expect anybody would say anything, but it was good to know that no one felt some desire to, tell us to have a different faith about it. And that's really kind of what we got. We got 2 babies delivered. And part of the end of that pregnancy is worth mentioning. So as we come towards the very close of that pregnancy, we know where there's going to be a C-section. Our medical professionals have already said, these babies are both pretty small. We're really concerned that a natural birth could put so much stress that we come into an emergency. We recommend we do a C-section for the safety of the babies, so we don't put them through the stress of a natural birth. And we had no arguments about that. That was fine. So we had a date scheduled. And we had a date scheduled that represented about 36 weeks total, which is a little early, tiny bit premature, but not a lot. And we're still going back for visits quite a lot because baby A is still growth restricted, a very small baby. Well, a little early at what represents about 34 and a half weeks, babies came. It was go time. And it's a Sunday morning. And my wife had not really been briefed on this is what labor is going to feel like. This is what it's like when you're going into labor. This is how it'll feel. This is how often the contractions will come. Nobody really told her that because they assumed you're going to C-section. So why explain this? Yeah. So she's going into labor on a Sunday morning. And I'm just like, well, I'm getting ready for church. I guess we'll bring you to church. Sorry you feel so bad. So she says, you got to call up to the emergency department, talk to whoever's on labor and delivery, and get somebody on call, tell them about what I'm feeling and ask what we should do. She didn't say I'm in labor. She just said I'm having lots of contractions and pain. So I explained this to the doctor, and he's like, okay, you're going to get a liter of water. She's going to drink it pretty quickly. And if this all calms down in like 15 to 20 minutes, you're fine. But if it's not done in 30 minutes, it's go time. You're coming up to the apartment, to the emergency room. You're delivering. That's it. It's go time. And I'm like, oh, you're kidding, right? He's like, no. This works. This is the determining factor. So I got her a liter of water. She drank a good amount of that. And within 20 minutes, she's like, no, it's go time. This is not going away. And in that 20 minutes, I had like cooked breakfast for myself. She's like sitting on the couch, and I'm just like, well, I guess I'll get ready for my day.
Right.
So yeah, we headed on up, and although our immediate team that had been working with us all this time was not present, they were off that day. They had briefed everybody else in their medical cohort. Hey, I want you to know about this case. They had talked through our case multiple times. Everybody knew from like interns on up through the highest professionals. They knew our case. So when we came in, they're like, no problem. We know everything that's supposed to happen. we absolutely know your treatment plan, and we're going to follow it precisely. No arguments. We're not going to, discuss other treatment plans or any options. It was great. And that was just a really surprising thing that, our people couldn't be there, but they had passed over everything they could to whoever was going to be on call that day. So we got exactly the care plan that was intended for us. So we have a C-section. They didn't argue with that. Hey, we're doing this. So they have a C-section in the midst of labor and delivery. They've got to kind of slow things down enough to get her back into the surgical suite and start the process. So they deliver these two babies by C-section. And yes, that baby A, that's my first daughter. She's small. She's less than 4 pounds when delivered. She's very small. She fits in a hand pretty well.
Yeah.
And then this baby B, also my daughter. And we had already discussed, what do we do with the bishop? We already discussed, what do we do? And the bishop was, he's really trying to be comforting, but he's like, she's got to be born breathing. You can give her a name and a blessing. If she's not born breathing, you don't. Okay. You can give her a name and a blessing, but she's supposed to be born breathing. So I'm like, okay, all right, well, we'll rest on that. And we had talked with our medical professionals. We'd asked, how long will she survive outside the womb? And he was I think trying to be very honest. He said maybe 40 minutes, maybe less. It's very difficult to know. So while they're in the surgical suite, they brought this little baby B with Mermaid Syndrome over to mom. So mom got to see her, kind of do some face-to-face time, and I got to hold her a little bit. And then we put the two girls side by side. The two girls side by side. I've got a picture of my hand over top of both of them, next to each other, and totally by accident, I had kind of opened her eyes. I had a nurse that was like, "Hey, we tend to not do that. Their eyes will open on their own. We don't want to do it early, but it's done now." So, and then they let me back into the other room. I was sitting in another room waiting, and they brought baby B to me to hold until mom was done with the surgical suite. And she already knew this is the process. We'd already been walked through what this would be like. So she had already said, do the name and blessing, even if I'm not in the room, get it done. And she was breathing, and I could feel this heat. I got my hand underneath of that swaddling blanket right against her skin and could feel that heat of her back against my hand. And we had a dear friend that works at the hospital and was working that day. So he just came and visited us. He's just got a badge. He can go anywhere he wants. And I had texted to our home teacher at the time, and to the bishop, and we'd sent some messages out. So my home teacher, he showed up. And so the three of us gathered, and we gave her a name and a blessing. And then we sat, and they kind of sat with me for a bit, since my wife was still in the surgical suite being kind of cleaned up and put back together. And I just held her, and we kind of talked a little bit as men do, and made little jokes here and there. But every so often, every minute or so, she would take this big gulp of air, and then it would all soften to this really quiet breathing. And so, I just every minute or so, I was like, you're there with us. Like, I hear you. And for me, I got to look in her eyes, which, as I say, the nurse kind of chided me, but hopefully we don't get comments. But yeah, I accidentally opened her eyes, but I looked into these eyes, and she has dark blue eyes, and it was like looking into deep wells of the ocean. It just was mesmerizing for me, and I felt really strongly this Titanic person behind her eyes, this this idea to me was like someone filled the room with the Spirit, and it was so immense. I felt confident that I knew this person that was there, and that I knew there was a person there behind those eyes. It was sad to feel that, her body was flawed. It wasn't going to support life. That was a very sad thing. But there was this joyful, wonderful comfort to feel like there was a person there, that very much wanted to be there, had chosen to come and experience life even for such a brief time. And the rest of the day, had a lot going on. It felt like a busy day. Mom did come back into the room. Mom also held her for a time. There was a resident that was coming in every little bit. He'd check for a heartbeat and breathing, and eventually, you kind of knew he was pulling out a phone. He was having to declare time of death. But the change that occurred, and I think there's a lot of people that talk about this impression they get when they're around someone who has passed away. The change that occurred just seemed really swift and very simple and clear. And it's changed to from this feeling of like there is a person there to, well, this is just a body, and that's okay. And so we spent a little time with this little one in NICU. We were in and out of the hospital in a few days, and visiting the NICU to see our other baby. And I recall when we were being released, my wife was really worried. We hadn't been sleeping with the baby in the room, so he'd only been around this baby A for little brief visits in the NICU. But we're ready to go home. We're discharged, and she's saying, "I'm so worried she's going to miss us, and we're abandoning her." And I'm like, she isn't going to know, because she doesn't know. It's not going to occur to her. But she asked me to give a blessing to this other baby before we left. So she's getting some stuff dealt with her discharge, and she sends me to the NICU to go and provide a blessing. So it's just me. There's a few other babies as well in the NICU, but the nurses really just left us with some space. And getting to hold that daughter and give her a blessing was a really sweet experience. And I've done a few instances of doing baby blessings, doing little blessings in a hospital for a baby. So it's kind of just sweet to do this for my own baby. And I found the words flowed really, really quickly. Just immediately knowing what to say just came over me, and was able to give her a blessing and then say, okay, well, now we get to go. We're going to go home, and we'll come and see you every day. That kind of experience was a very different type of a different thing. I could definitely sense like, oh, there's someone here. This is a real person. But it just didn't seem to like fill the entire room with this feeling of absolute immensity. Mm-hmm. And I just took that as a note, like, okay, this is definitely a little spirit here, but it's just a little different because we know that we have all of our lives together.
Yes.
With this other little baby, we had a brief moment. So that was pretty kind of heavy.
Yeah. Kenneth, that's an astounding experience. And it seems like, although that's pretty specific, and I don't know how many people have had a similar experience, I think a lot of people have struggled with infertility.
Oh, yeah.
Struggled, or not struggled, have lost an infant. Mm-hmm. And something that struck me about your story that I feel like is common, and I'd love for you to comment on it, is an individual could, I feel like, easily get angry and say, hey, listen, I got my life in order. I became temple worthy. I I get temple worthy. I take my wife to the temple and I get sealed. All of these blessings line up. Like my ship has come in. I did it. Blessings are predicated upon obedience. I'm clearly being blessed right now. Like the hard times are over, and the hard times are not over. Hard
Yeah.
times aren't over until for this life ever. Talk to me about the perspective that you gained. Why isn't there any anger, or was there anger that you wrestled with?
Well, in that moment, I think a lot of it had been somewhat dissipated because we had from that week 18 anatomy week to delivery, where we did have quite a roller coaster to feel through. We had two names chosen. We did use both names, which we didn't toss anything out, but we had two names chosen. We already had people aware, like, oh, well, you're going to need two of everything, you're going and we had two of some things. My wife was actually really eager to get a twin stroller, and so we got the twin stroller before week 18 and had this twin stroller sitting in our closet ready for use. And then at week 18 she just thought, oh, I've got to get rid of that now because we won't need a twin stroller. I think both of us did get some of that sentiment of this isn't the way it's supposed to go. So some of that had to be worked through. And I think that during those 18 weeks, or kind of 16 and a half weeks, there was definitely some of that that emotional experience. And I also had an experience that kind of touched upon it after. So we've come home, we've got a baby, we've got our surviving twin, we're having to deal with grief. And I remember thinking, well, maybe that's good enough. Maybe that's enough. We've done enough. We've given our best effort at having children. Maybe that's enough. And at this point, we still have additional little frozen pairs at our fertility dock. So we've got more attempts we could do. And I'm just like, well, maybe we could just stop. We can donate those. One child, we'll take care of one child. That'll be fine.
Sure.
And I remember distinctly, I was commuting to work as this thought just kind of crossing my mind. And while driving, I felt really overwhelmed with this sort of kind of a waking dream, a little like a daydream, but it didn't feel like I'm inventing this. It felt like, hold on now. No, you have something else here. And so in that very first experience, it was simply, I saw within my mind's eye that I was holding a little baby in our church building and providing a baby blessing with a circle of men around me, and we're doing another baby blessing. And there wasn't much to the experience, but the first words that I said are, this is the blessing you have required of me. And then that kind of closed off. And I finished my drive to work, and I thought, well, that's nice wishful thinking, and so this started to occur in kind of quiet moments. And I would see a little bit of this scenario play out in my mind's eye, and there were additional things going on. So I'd get this line, and then I'd get this other line, and then I'd have this other comment, and it started building. And it was always the same, plus a little more. And there were two babies. So there was one and another. And then there was another daughter, and there was a son. And there was a name. And for both of the names, there was this little phrase, this is the name you've chosen. And this is what it means. And so I started to get this experience, and I'm like, the same thing, plus a little more. I think I better start writing this down. But also I thought, well, you know what, maybe I'm wrong that it's been enough. So I finally talked to my wife about it, and I said, oh, I feel like maybe we are supposed to keep going, keep trying the IVF, and at least just try as many times as we have the little frozen vials, and we'll just see where it goes. But I think there's another daughter, and I think there's a son, and I think we're supposed to keep trying it out. And she was all too happy to keep going. She was surprised that I had considered we could just stop somewhere along the way. And so eventually I did write it down. I wrote down both of these two blessings and the names, and I shared the names with her. And she actually kind of disputed one of them, but otherwise we did go forward with those names, used them as she approved.
Yes.
And in that process, I think there was also this reminder of like, there's someone else beyond the veil that knows me. It's not just people that have passed away. And I definitely think some of that could be informed by growing up in the era of like Saturday's Warrior and My Turn on Earth, and reading a lot of Jack Wayland books. And
Yes.
So I feel like there's like a connection of like some of this that we use sometimes as our fiction culture comes with this grounding, gives you something to ground yourself in. And some of it is the spirit needs to connect with something that you can grab hold of and say, this actually makes sense to me. So for me, that made sense. For as much as my wife looked at me like, what are you really experiencing? How can you really claim that that's happening? It was kind of what I needed to grab hold of and ground myself and say, yeah, this is real experiences.
Yeah, the spirit speaks our language.
Yeah.
And that language is going to be different than the guy next to you.
And so we do have a son and another daughter. We've had all of them. We've actually had multiples for all of our pregnancies, but we have not had any more infant loss. So with the next attempt, there was a triple. So when my son was born, there was a triple. And what they were able to see at the fertility doc was he was a little more careful to make sure he got all of them the very first time. So the very first time, he's like, okay, let me make sure that there's not one in there. I think we missed it last time. So he found out, oh, there's double. You got two. Okay, you got two again. And then we came back again, and he's looking through. He's like, oh, we got three. We got three. Sorry, I did it again to you.
You're like, Doc, what's the deal here?
But with that one, it was a different experience. They had three, and eventually they came to us and said, okay, our imaging system, it's fine for what we need. But with the pair, there's a single and a pair, we need to see better. And the imaging system we've got can't give us the contrast and the detail needed. So we need to do this handover earlier. So contact your team at your perinatal team, get that handover sooner, because we got to see what's happening here. I think it's a dangerous condition, but I can't tell you for sure. I need somebody with better vision to diagnose it in terms of imaging. So we get the date set up, and this is, I think, week 9. Just a short time into the pregnancy, week 9, we visit with our fertility doc, and he's like, okay, I got 3 little babies, or little, like, I guess we're at zygote stage at that time, or maybe embryo, I think it's, I have trouble remembering the clinical terms now, but we used to know them. Used to know. So we got 3 heartbeats. And he's got it confirmed, showed us the imaging. He says, when have you got your appointment for going to get imaging with your professional team, with your perinatal team? And my wife says, we got our appointment tomorrow. So from today until tomorrow, he's like, great, good, okay. We definitely need to see better what's going on with this pair. And of course, they're growing bigger, so that his images are getting better. But he's like, you really need to get into them. So the next day, very next day, this is about week 9, and we go in, and the imaging tech is working with us, and she says, "Okay, I got one, but the pair, I've got visibility on the pair, but there's no heartbeats." And she's like, and she does the whole bit. She goes through multiple times trying to make sure that she's got the aim and just all this stuff that she can as an imaging tech. And she's like, "No, you have one baby." And so then, of course, we talk to our perinatal specialist. It's the same doctor. He definitely knows us. And they're able to look at the images better, and they're able to determine what occurred. Is that it's I think I'm going to forget the actual vocabulary now, but it's that the amniotic fluid was separated. So they had an amniotic sac that had one barrier in between instead of 2 separate amniotic sacs. And then they were both pumping blood back and forth to the placenta. So they had umbilical cords that were connected to one another and to the placenta. So they're pumping blood back and forth to each other and back and forth to the placenta. And that just couldn't be sustained. Yeah. There are perinatal surgical procedures that can address that if it's caught early, and we just didn't catch it early enough. And really just overnight was the moment. So the next day we were down to one baby. Yeah. And that progressed totally normal. My son was just was gigantic. He was so big to my eyes, and then, of course, to the nursing, they're like, "Yeah, he's a good, healthy baby. He's totally fine. Nothing wrong." So we went through that totally normal pregnancy. We visited less often, which was very strange for us. Our first pregnancy was like, okay, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, we're going to see you. And then they're like, "Yeah, come back in a month. We'll see you in a month." Right. Yeah, maybe come back 6 weeks. It's very surprising.
Wow.
And then the third pregnancy, we did have another twins, but it was about week 7 or so that the other stopped developing, and we just had one baby that progressed the remainder of the pregnancy, and born healthy and came home right away. No time in the NICU or anything. And so we just thought, this is wild. How do you not spend time in the NICU? How do you not have weekly visits at the doctor? How are you telling us not to come back for 6 weeks? That's crazy.
Yeah, be healthy.
So, yeah.
Wow.
Those healthy babies.
I tell you what, something struck me. You are clearly a person of deep faith, right? I mean, you are, after you've had this experience with your first pregnancy, I mean, you are having baby blessings being dictated to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that requires a lot of faith. And I think also, though, that isn't the first story of huge amounts of faith that you shared with us. The first story, or an earlier story, is when you felt prompted. I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth. You felt prompted of what to fast for, and it wasn't to fast for the grandiose miracle. And I think I forget. And I'm paraphrasing, and I'll look it up and put it in the notes here. But was it 4th Nephi, when the Lord says to Nephi, "I know that you won't ask amiss." He says, "I will answer whatever, I will give you whatever you pray for, because I know that you won't pray for something that is unrighteous or against my will." And I think, man, Kenneth, not a lot of us have enough faith to not pray for the huge miracle and to recognize that that's faith. Because at the end of the day, I don't want what I want. I want what God wants. And if I know what God wants, then I can fast for that and I can pray for that.
Yeah, I definitely felt like we had something really positive with that choice, with that decision to say, the miracle would be that we get children. Yeah. The miracle is that we have a healthy pregnancy. We definitely felt the risks. My wife had risk factors that they clearly spoke about in very honest ways to us. The pregnancy had risk factors that they spoke about in very honest ways. And I think there was a sense of, the miracle is just having this baby. It's it felt like it would be a little careless. So I definitely agree. That's a really interesting touch point there. I had not myself thought of that connection. But now the power of the sealing, which is referenced there with Nephi, is something that I feel is really an interesting thing to have learned about. So we were married civilly, and we later got sealed. And that sealing power then, of course, extends to all of our children because they're born within that covenant. They're born after that time, so they're born within the covenant. Now, there's another experience that relates to that sealing power that really touches upon that. And it's kind of a small series of experiences. So we have one baby. We've been married for a good number of years. We definitely have got to know each other, and we've definitely gone through like the troubles of early marriage.
Sure.
So we have about a roughly 6-month-old first child, and my wife is experiencing postpartum depression and kind of unresolved grief of infant loss. And I'm working. I'm traveling for work. So my boss was great. My first line level boss was great about kind of cutting back on my work travel when this child was born. But we've gone about 6 months, and he's like, I kind of need to put you out on a project. I can't have you sit at your desk all the time. And I got a project that someone's specifically requesting you by name. I got to make it happen. Mm-hmm. They know they want you in charge of this project. I've got to do it. And it's an airport project. So we're going to do 2 airports, and we're going to do Wi-Fi design for 2 airports. And at this point, we're doing physical design. We're going on site. We're surveying. There's a lot of presence needed. Okay. So I'm working with another guy. He's a fantastic peer. I definitely love him. He and I talk about religion now and then, not a lot, but I know he's a man of faith, and I can talk to him about issues of faith or the scriptures. And so he's requested me. He knew, if I've got this job, I need him on this job. But what it's going to entail is a number of months of traveling to site, being on site. He's actually not very far. He's driving distance away, but he knows the rest of the team is probably going to have to fly in. So he helps me kind of pick a few names. Like who are we going to get on this project? He makes his suggestions and kind of compares notes with me. And we put together a team of, I think we had 9 of us total. So a project manager and himself, and then myself, and then additional, I guess that's another 6 teammates. And that's both from my own office and from our Mexico office. So we've got a lot of guys there. We're all men. We're all fathers. And I'm going to be there in total, I'm going to be there for 11 weeks. Some of the weekends I'm going home, and some of the weekends I'm staying there at site. And my wife is at home taking care of a baby, and suddenly I'm going to be missing all week long. And some weekends I might choose to stay. So she opts for something else. She decides to travel home. Okay. So we're in North Carolina. Home is Washington State. So she travels across the country to be with her family, to help her deal with postpartum and deal with raising a baby that's about 6 months old. And we're still dealing with some of those issues that probably could have been dealt with as an early couple, but we hadn't quite dealt with them. Mm-hmm. And so a couple of weeks in, she kind of sends this email. This is what I've decided. I'm traveling. My parents are going to help me with the cost. My sister's going to help me with the cost. I'm going to travel there. I'm going to be there. And then when you're done with this project, let's talk. Let's sort these things out. Yes. Now, I misunderstood the email, and I think it's important to note real early on. I misunderstood and misread right off the bat and took it as an ultimatum, which it was not intended as. But that there might be a good that came out of that, because that was quite shocking. So my first reaction was like, well, fine, we can just split it all apart. We'll get into a custody battle. We'll get into a battle about all kinds of stuff. We'll just quit. I've had enough. We can just quit.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the weekends that I'm staying up at this customer site in a hotel, just staying in a hotel. I don't really have a place to go for the weekend to do. I'm not much of a tourist. And so I'm just staying in the hotel. I'm reviewing documents that we've done, our engineering work, some of our design documents. And I think I decided not to go out to eat. I'd kind of got tired of dining out at little establishments, and I just was like, I think I'm just going to not eat tonight. So it's a Saturday or a Sunday. I'm not sure exactly which day of the weekend. But I'm sitting there alone in the hotel, and it's as though there's a door that sort of comes into existence there in the room, and someone opens the door, and behind the door is this immense light. And this individual comes through and closes the door, and they individually are bright. And I immediately recognize the company. It just immediately, I know who this is. And this is the same person that I could feel there holding my baby, holding that little girl. I knew immediately this is her presence. And she came and sat down beside me. And she offered a testimony to me. She said that you should not split up this family. You are sealed, and I am a part of this, and I am not there to prevent you. But I have power and blessings in the place where I am because of that sealing. And that was really impressive. I never thought of how the sealing extends beyond the veil. I had never spent time thinking about it. I didn't have doubts. I just never really reflected on it. And so her testimony was really an impressive thing. However, I don't think it changed my opinion right away. I still felt really upset. I still felt a lot of anger. And she went away. And later, she came back with another person. And it just seemed entirely clear that there were two people. And they sat on either side of me. And so this daughter that I knew, that I had met, I had felt her presence there as I held her, kind of said the same message again. And then this other individual introduced herself as my daughter, and I said, you should not split up this family. You are sealed, and I am meant to come into this family, and you and your wife are my parents, and I am not there to prevent you, to help you with this. And it was really interesting to me because, of course, I knew that with this daughter that had passed, I knew her body was flawed, her physical body. But she walked in on two legs. She didn't come floating in she walked in on two legs. Her body was whole. Her spirit body, her spiritual body was whole. And it was a reminder, she came into this life with a flawed body, and that's unfortunate, but she had a full and complete whole body. And that is something she looks forward to. And this other little individual, in my mind was something like 9 years old or so. Seemed like a small child, and sat beside me, and I could see little like pigtails coming off of her head. And I just felt like I absolutely could see this person, although I was alone in the room. And both of them really testify to that power of the ceiling, the importance of it to them individually and to our family as a whole. And then they both left. And for me, there was just an immense feeling of love, and an overwhelming and large feeling of love that I knew I knew this one individual. I knew that her presence, just when she walked into the room, it was like I absolutely recognized that is the same feeling. And this other individual, who I could say that's a distinct individual, but I don't know them, and the feeling of immediate and immense love from both individuals, and that really changed my attitude pretty quick, to feel like both individuals had come and had something very important to say about our family and about the sealing power that they wanted to have. It still is difficult, but it created a really different sense of why we would have a ceiling in our life. So that's that really changed my attitudes a lot about why are we sealed? Why do we stay together when we're married and we have troubles? Yeah.
So, I mean, real quick, I don't want to take your whole evening. I really appreciate you spending the time, but an unbelievable experience, a fantastic experience, but that doesn't make your marital problems go away. So what do you do?
Yeah. Well, I think first was I reread the email and with a different perspective, and was able to look and say, like, well, this isn't an ultimatum. Mm-hmm. That's not quite what it is. So that's helpful. So reviewing that experience and that attitude that I had, that was a quick adjustment. But also, it gave me the reflection that we do have individuals beyond the veil that are really aware of us. There were descriptions of, I want this to happen, in that email, that I was able to say, you know what, I can find a way to make that happen.
Yeah.
Some simple behavior changes can make that happen. So yeah. That certainly. And then I think it really changed my perspective on the struggles we were having. When we married civilly, I had one divorce previous. Mm-hmm. And I looked back sometimes like, well, that was really easy. It was really easy. A bit of paperwork, move apart, and that's done. And this gave this perspective that said, you have something of eternal weight, mm-hmm. that is available because of the sealing power, not because of you individually, but because of the sealing power. You have this thing of eternal weight and eternal magnitude. And maybe your little struggles and your feelings, even if they're valid, are kind of small compared to that thing of eternal magnitude and weight. I think that's something really valuable for me, for myself. It changed my perspective on the struggles that we have, and it changed my perspective on maybe being right, or getting my wife to view me as being right. Definitely changed, because I thought, well, actually, it's not maybe for us, but it's for these individuals that have said, this ceiling is a blessing and a power for me.
Yes.
Instead of thinking, oh, it's from my exaltation the temple teaches us from my exaltation. Well, no, maybe it's not. Well, I mean, it is, but I mean, maybe it's
More
so
to
much
it.
more. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that definitely changed. We did still have struggles, but it definitely changed my perspective on why those struggles come into our life and why some of them might not be resolved, and how to go about letting them lie and dissipate on their own. I do think that there's some marital therapists that accept the idea that there's going to be trouble and you just can't fix everything and you just kind of let it lie, and some things will go away on their own. And there may be some therapists that say, no, we've got to get things in the open. We've got to air out the dirty laundry and resolve things. And I definitely started to lean more on that first idea. Like, there may be some things that just don't change. Mm-hmm. And if I can let go of wanting to change those things, whether it's about myself or about my spouse or about our relationship, maybe that'll be okay to let go.
I love that idea that it's a combination. It's a combination of perspective. You know, you said your perspective changed, but that also you changed some behavior.
Yeah.
It seems like it requires both. It requires an eternal perspective, but also if I'm a complete dirtbag, it's not fair for me to tell my wife, well, you just got to put up with it because eternally I'm going to turn out pretty good. So you just have to wait like a couple of years and then I'll be a pretty good investment. Like, I don't think that's how it's supposed to work out.
That would be a really tough sell.
Yeah. Oh, man.
It would. But I do think that perspective was a big change for me. It really helped me to believe that what I was doing was not something to be proud of. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes I felt prideful that I had done many steps to move from like my military self-identity to something different. I often told people that as a soldier, I was very callous. I got really tough and hardened. And that extended into spiritual things. It was, I felt tough. Stuff doesn't touch me. And I was only a multimedia illustrator. I was not some deep, hard soldier. I wasn't infantry.
But to your point, though, anybody can develop calluses. Anybody can develop spiritual calluses if that's what you want.
Yeah. Well, Laban and Lemuel give us this great example, right? Yeah. Laban and Lemuel give this fantastic example, and Nephi tells them real clearly to their face that the Spirit tried to speak with you, an angel spoke to you, but you were past feeling.
Yeah.
And in my teenage years, I've had a bishop tell me about that and say, and I think what you're experiencing is you have made yourself past feeling. You're having difficulty with feeling and receiving the Holy Ghost because of choices that you've made. And so I that since I think 16 years old, I've thought about that reference, that going past feeling. And then as a soldier, I definitely felt like I toughened myself purposefully, and sometimes against spiritual impressions. Mm-hmm. And so that softening process is also a similar choice-based process to become soft and receptive. So for me, it was a little bit like the experience of Alma, of having someone say, you're really in the wrong place right now, and I'm here to help you turn around. Yeah. Alma the Younger, that is, And that experience that's described for Alma the Younger, I feel like, wow, that must have been a really personal thing. I think we quickly think of it as, it was just some angel. It was just some angel that came and spoke to him. And of course, we later have that angel saying, well, your father prayed for this. And then later we have that angel come back and say, hey, I've been watching you and you've done these wonderful things. And I'm like, that must have been a lot more personal. It must have been someone much more closely connected to him, to say, I get to come back and watch over you and see that you have made the changes that I told you to make, and to see the effect it's had on you. So I have not had any other visits from my daughter. No other experience that I would constitute as that. But I do have this second daughter that when I gave her that blessing, it was word for word. Everything that I had kind of seen. I say imagined, but everything I had seen in my mind's eye. And the first words were, "This is the blessing you have required of me."
Wow.
And that also kind of sticks with me, that she knew enough to say, yeah, I expect you to be there. You can't be absent. I won't accept absenteeism from you. You've got to deliver. And I require this of you, instead of I request this of you, or I invite you to, it was very forceful.
Wow. Well, there have been a lot of fantastic things that you shared with us today, and I really, really appreciate it. I think there are a lot of people that can relate to various aspects of your story. So thank you so much for being willing to share those with us.
Oh, you're welcome.